Good morning, Senator Reid. Nice to see you today.
Good morning.
So this is the first time in, I want to say 20 years, Senator, that you have been unable to attend in person our congressional breakfast. But based on our conversation a few minutes ago, you have a pretty good reason why. Can you tell us about it?
Well, I have the privilege of joining many colleagues and many dignitaries in honoring the 80th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy, D-Day. And I have a personal connection. My division, the 82nd Airborne Division, went uh, in the early morning hours of D-Day to secure the landing zones and also the corridors off the beach. And so it'll be good to get back with the airborne troopers at a place that's very special to all of us.
So we'll be airing this video on June 10th. So what will you have seen by that point? You're on your way back, I understand, on the 10th. So tell us what your plans would have entailed.
Well, we're going to participate in the commemorative services on June 6th. The president will be there. I believe President Macron also will be there. Then we're going to tour the battlefields. It's a special place and a special moment. And that will encompass most of our time, just reflecting on the sacrifice and service of thousands and thousands of young Americans and the difference they made in our lives. And we have to carry on their service in our own day and age.
How do you imagine that you will be reflective at that particular moment, given your long and storied service to this nation?
Well, I think, frankly, I will be in awe of the young men, generally young men at that time, landing on the beaches and dropping them in the drop zones. The incredible courage they had, and also for someone who's been around jumping out of airplanes, the fear that they used not to disable themselves, but to inspire themselves to keep going for something greater than themselves. And I think what you come away with is a profound recognition of the sacrifice and service that has sustained this country. And I think we all can ask ourselves and should ask ourselves, are we making the same kind of profound dedication and service and sacrifice to vindicate what they've won and how much they've given us? And so I think those are the feelings that will be going back and forth in my mind.
So you mentioned jumping out of airplanes and inspiring oneself to think broader, beyond themselves, something greater than themselves. How does one actually do that in the moment?
Well, the first couple of jumps you make are more sort of based on just mechanical aspect, that you just sense the door, the wind, the light, and you go for the door. And there's frankly a strong tradition in the military that you've got to do the job, even as difficult as it might be. After a while, it depends on different people, but after about 15 or so jumps, it becomes much more of a routine, although never quite routine. And then later in my career, I became a jump master. So I had a lot to do because I had to get everyone safely out the door and then get myself, the last person, out of the stick, if they called it. And then it was a much more sort of business as usual. But I don't think anyone jumps out of a appropriate airplane without at least a small sense that this is unusual, it's not dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever have a moment where you hesitated for a minute and reflected on what your responsibility is, as a member of the military and what you were called upon to do, knowing what was happening down below?
Well, I think you do have those moments, but typically, particularly in a command position, you're trying to think ahead. You're trying to ensure that your troops are as well protected as possible as you try to accomplish the mission. The last thing you think about is yourself, and that's the spirit of our professional soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, is that it's the mission you're responsible for, it's the men you're responsible for, and now women, thank goodness. And then the last thing you'd think about would be, what about me, etc. And that's the sign of a professional and a good soldier. And I tried to do that. There are moments where you reflected, but you're pretty busy out there in the field, particularly. So there's always somebody with some problem you have to deal with. But as long as you accomplish your mission and protect your soldiers,
Mhm.
then you are the third priority or lower.
Well, thank you for your service, Senator. We know you have a long and really courageous history serving our nation and our state. And I know all of us at the Chamber are deeply indebted to you for your intrepid nature and your skillful way of approaching any battle. So, with that, let's transition a little bit to some of the issues that we are confronting here in Rhode Island. First and foremost, let's talk about what we are experiencing. A lot of interest in the Washington Bridge and how it's affecting the local economy and the ability for commerce to flourish, the ability for people to go to and from their jobs, and also the ability of healthcare workers and those that are involved in the healthcare industry to really be able to access healthcare facilities in a way that we were once accustomed to. The state has applied for a mega grant. So let's talk a little bit about what the prerogative you believe of the Biden administration is at current, Senator Reid, in terms of understanding the magnitude of this of the bridge. Certainly not anything like compared to the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, thank heavens. But what are you looking at, and what are you predicting the federal resources will be to help Rhode Island really expedite a return to normal?
Well, our goal is to secure as much funding as we can, and hopefully the vast majority of the funding. This is an issue that my colleagues and I brought directly to the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. He came up here, he's seen it. He sat down with Mayor De Silva in East Providence and talked about the effect on small businesses. So this is not something academic with him. I've called him several times to remind him. When he appeared before the Appropriations Subcommittee, which I'm a member of, I made the point of stressing again, we're going to need federal assistance. This is a real crisis, not as great a magnitude as Baltimore, but very similar. We've essentially separated the east and west of the Providence metropolitan area, just as the Key Bridge separated the east and west of Baltimore. So we're having real impacts. And then we've been working closely with the SBA, and their EIDL loans. These are disaster relief loans. They've been very aggressive. I think a number of loans have already been granted. And I would urge business people, if they are in need of such loan or assistance, contact my office or contact the SBA, because they really want to be helpful. The issue I think people would like to talk about is grants. That is not one of the tools that the FEMA and SBA have in these situations. There might be an opportunity with ARPA funding that is still available to dedicate some of that to business communities and other local agencies. But this has been extraordinarily disruptive, and you put your finger on it. It's people who live in the East Bay, but their treatment is at lifespan. People who live in the East Bay, but their children are going to high school in Providence. And this is a tremendous dislocation. And we have to be realistic. This is not going to cure itself in a couple of months, et cetera. This is a long process of demolishing the old bridge, building a new one. But in the meantime, I think the state has done a great deal to expand the traffic, the capability of the remaining structures to handle as much traffic as possible. Nevertheless, I see, and I haven't caught myself in long, long lines of traffic trying to get across, and it disrupts both the economy and the social connections in Rhode Island. So we have to get it fixed. And I make this case constantly to anyone who will listen, uh, all the way up to the channel into the White House, but particularly with Secretary Buttigieg, who's going to be the point person on this.
So the issue of 80-20 versus 90-10 or 60-40, how are those calculations derived?
Well, basically, the Highway Trust Fund provides 80% of most highway projects in the state. It's federal dollars, and then the state has to make their match. Then there are grant programs. For example, when I was chairman of the subcommittee on transportation appropriations, I created a bridge program designed to address the states with the worst bridges. And it turned out, coincidentally, Rhode Island was one of those states. And for several years, we've been getting about $50 million a year in grants for bridge construction. So there are different ways that we can get money into the state. The mega grants are such that they can go all the way up to the full cost of the project. And I think Rhode Island will be in a good competitive position, but it is a competition. It's not, uh, designated, or you can declare we get it automatically. But we're working very hard to make sure that the Department of Transportation is very much aware of what's going on. As I said, the secretary has been here personally. We continually talk to him, both in public and in private, and we want to put ourselves in the best position to get that grant.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of people, wonder like how did the bridges across this country get to a place where someone like you would have to chair a special subcommittee to really analyze the inadequacies of our bridge infrastructure across the country. Is there a common denominator that you've been able to detect?
Yes, there is, and that was, frankly, neglect. We were not reinvesting in roads, bridges, infrastructure, and that goes back several administrations. But I remember when President Trump was running, one of the big things he was going to do is do an infrastructure bill. Well, the infrastructure bill didn't pass, but his tax bill did. In this administration, one of the first things that President Biden did was pass a significant bipartisan infrastructure bill that is going to take on aspects of our roads, our sewer systems, our horizontal infrastructure, and a host of other issues that have been, frankly, just ignored. We haven't been able to put enough money in over the years. Um, and now that's catching up with us. But I think with the infrastructure bill, and I'll emphasize again, a bipartisan infrastructure bill, we're positioned over the next several years to significantly improve our transportation systems and our other systems. And that's going to be very important for many reasons. One, economic efficiency. If you can move quickly, that saves time, and in business, time is money. Second, we're looking at environmental problems that are challenging to our present infrastructure. So these funds could be used and must be used to help us address climate issues and environmental issues. Um, and it'll help us, I hope, get new technology literally on the road with electric vehicles, with other innovative techniques so that we can uh, move efficiently and move environmentally without harming uh, the world.
You mentioned infrastructure upgrades. So, building on that, Senator, interesting developments at Quonset and funds that you have brought to this state to really make access to and from Quonset, particularly for trucks, heavy vehicles that are going to the port area a lot easier with the opening of additional connection off of 195, not 195, but 95, right into the park. Before it was only going north, but now we have access from the south. So tell us a little bit about how you've seen that impacting the desirability of doing business
Well,
down here.
Quonset Point has become one of the most vibrant and vital centers of production and entrepreneurship in not just in the state of Rhode Island, but in the Northeast. Uh, and it began a long time ago. One of my first efforts was to put in modern rail service so that we could move in vehicles from the port all the way across the country by rail if necessary. Uh, that was the first step. The second step, working closely with then Congressman Bob Wiggin, was to put in Route 403, which is a expressway right into the heart of Quonset. But what we could not do at that time was connect 403 with 95 South. You had to get off the highway, you had to go through the side streets and other streets. And now we've just gotten an $81 million grant from the federal government to connect Route 403, I believe, with 95 South. So now trucks and other material vehicles coming off the port can be hauled directly south without getting off the highway and directly north. So we now have that connection. And further, we're doing a major rehabilitation of the Quonset airfield. So you have one of those rare facilities in the United States, in the Northeast particularly, which has one of the most efficient ports. It also has a wonderful airfield, and it's now going to be connected by highways north and south, in fact, all across the country. So it's really coming together. And I think it's going to be a great boon to the economy of Rhode Island. Of course, one of the major facilities there is Electric Boat. An electric boat is engaged in the number one defense issue we have, which is building our new submarines, both our ballistic submarines and attack submarines. The workers there do a great service to the country, and we need more workers. So this is a situation where we're generating jobs, and also the sophisticated skills that are needed there are being, I think, incorporated in a lot of the curriculum in high schools and junior colleges, et cetera. So that's another driving force. And all of this is coming together and will be there for a long time. We have about 30 years of submarine construction we have to undertake. We've got to replace our entire ballistic fleet and our entire attack submarine fleet, and that's going to take decades. So we have this constant demand for high skilled work. We have access to a great facility. And again, I think we're seeing a remarkable rebound in the area around Quonset and all over the state.
Get a lot of questions, Senator, about particularly as we're talking about life sciences and really trying to make the borders more porous between Massachusetts and Rhode Island for the development of certain life sciences jobs around the issue of mass transit, rapid rail between Boston and Providence, and the ability to really leverage that as a way to really grow our own tax base to have people be able to live and work on either side of the border and commute. What is your current understanding of how rail service may be set to improve over the course of the next 2 to 5 years?
Well, rail service is improving, and one of the biggest improvements was the new Central Falls, Pawtucket train station, which is getting significant traffic. And we've also connected it to the RIPTA bus system. So buses will go right there. There's adequate parking. So we're seeing in fact, as a result, a renaissance around the neighborhood of older buildings being redeveloped for residential and business purposes. But that's one important feature. The Attleboro station just reopened recently in Massachusetts. And that'll provide access or choice of access to the rail. And we're beginning to see a great deal of commuting back and forth between Boston and Providence. I've ridden the train a few times up there in the morning runs around 7 a.m. or so. There's hardly an empty seat by the time you get to Providence. And it's the young workers with usually a laptop and a cup of coffee getting a little work done before they actually get to work. But it's a tremendous asset, and we have to do much more. It's not only efficient in terms of time and getting from one place to another, but it's environmentally better than 1,000 automobiles on the roads. So we're working hard. That's been a process over many, many years, but it's going to be a continued asset to the state and to the region, to Massachusetts also. We're trying to get companies to come down here or people who work in Boston to come down here, and we're getting some of that.
You've covered quite a few domestic issues, so let's now turn to Israel and Hamas and the future of the Netanyahu government and presidency. You have been outspoken on some of the challenges there, particularly as tensions are, beginning to really reach a boiling point for the Biden administration. What is your sense of how this looks on the ground from a change in administration position?
Well, I think, first of all, the administration stood up and supported the state of Israel at a moment of incredible horror. I was in Israel 7 days after the attack. It was a horrific, barbaric attack, designed to be so. They were told to take cameras rather, so they could film the atrocities, which, again, almost unthinkable. And 1,000 Israelis and Americans, too, were killed. It was deliberately designed by Hamas. Their stated goal is the destruction not just of the state of Israel, but the Jewish people, and that can't be tolerated. And so we responded, I think, correctly and forcefully by sending in naval task forces, by beginning to coordinate with our Central Command, led by General Kurilla, to work with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And I think our efforts have been important in many respects. One is that a goal that most people don't recognize is that our presence there has prevented the escalation of this violence, in my view. I think many people assume after Hamas's attack that we followed very quickly by Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have 100,000 rockets sending them into Israel. That will be followed by Iranian proxies in Syria, that Iran itself, etc., would attack. And indeed, Iran did attack in April. They sent in hundreds of missiles. And one of the most astounding military operations, I think, in history is that the combined efforts of the United States and other states, including Jordan and Israel and others, knocked down practically every one of those missiles. I think 2 got through. And that was a strong signal to the world that we're in a position to defend Israel. I think, though, and I've criticized, and I've been very, very blunt in criticism, that the Israeli forces, generally, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has not conducted this operation in a way that is, one, operationally shrewd, and two, one that does not minimize civilian casualties. That's a bad tactic as well as a bad thing overall. They have to be much more precise. In fact, I've urged that both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Abbas from the Palestinian Authority step aside. New leadership is needed. People who are not trying to avoid blame for October 7th, and also not trying to avoid prison. And I think the leadership in Israel should be committed to what's best for the state of Israel. And that has to be a very precise operations on the ground that minimizes casualties, and also a robust effort to bring in humanitarian supplies. Um, and that's not been emphasized enough, I think, by all of the parties. Um, so we have to get more supplies in. We have to get food and medical supplies. We have to go after and defeat Hamas. They are not going to surrender their sworn opposition to Israel. They have to be defeated, but in a way that doesn't jeopardize the lives of many, many innocent people. It can be done. It's difficult. I've talked to many of our veterans from the Iraq War who fought in similar conditions in Mosul. It's a tough fight. It goes slow. You have to be extraordinarily careful, but it's something that uh, you win not only the battlefield, but you also hopefully win the trust of the local population. Because if you don't win that trust, then Hamas and the Palestinian people will see no other rationale but to stay engaged, and that would be a terrible outcome. Hamas has to be destroyed. Palestinian people have to be given a responsible, credible leadership.
Do you anticipate a combination of a new government on both sides as well as a ceasefire, some combination of both, one before the other?
Well, we're working very hard on a ceasefire. Bill Burns, who is our CIA director and a former diplomat of great renown, is on the ground, I believe, as we speak, trying to work together with the Qatari government, the Egyptian government, Hamas representatives in Qatar, and the Israelis to come up with the release of the hostages. Uh, if that is possible, uh, in conjunction with the ceasefire, that would be a wonderful development. Uh, and I would hope that would take place. But it's extremely difficult on both sides. You have to have the agreement of the Israelis and Hamas, and they have almost diametrically opposed objectives. So that's one thing. But we also have to, and we're beginning to engage the whole community of nations in that region into a settlement. And one aspect of this is what is the end state? And that's another reason why Prime Minister Netanyahu's position is very difficult, because he stated publicly he wants one state. He's not going to tolerate a Palestinian state. And if that's your position, then you're dealing ultimately either with ethnic cleansing, moving people out, or some type of apartheid system of second rate citizenship. What we have to do, together with all the world's leading nations, and particularly those in the Middle East, the Saudis, etc., is come up with a solution where we can have a stable two-state solution. And then you can, I think, ask and perhaps even demand that the Saudis and other terribly rich Arab countries donate to the reconstruction of the Palestinian Gaza area and other areas. And in that way, we can have a much more stable situation. But one of the criticisms that Netanyahu is getting, even from his own military, is what's the end state? Who's going to govern Palestine after we won the fight? And that has to be something that I think is an internationally sponsored Palestinian Authority.
Do you foresee a scenario where the prime minister would actually come to the U.S., travel to the U.S., um, as the House Speaker has invited him to address members of Congress on this issue?
Oh no, absolutely. I think it's something that wants to do, to seize the moment. You know, he has been involved in American politics for a long time, and not just as a casual observer. I can recall back in the debates for the resolution to go to war with Iraq, he actually testified. He was not a member of the Knesset then. He testified before the House that it was a great thing to invade Iraq back under George W. Bush, which was not a great thing. I think it was a strategic mistake of the first order. But he had no problem about showing up in the House of Representatives and giving his opinion. So I don't think he'll have any problems about showing up as the prime minister and giving his opinion.
One last question, Senator. Another very difficult part of the world when we're talking about China and Taiwan, and a delegation of United States senators, bipartisan, going to Taiwan to really shore up our relationships with the new democracy there. Is that something that's on your agenda?
Yes, it is. As the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, one of our major concerns is what we call Indo-PACOM, the Indo-Pacific Command. And we're trying to bolster its capacity and also its interoperability with our other allies in the region. One of the advantages we have and the Chinese do not have is that we have allies. And the AUKUS agreement between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States is an example of that. We pledged the Australians in Pillar 1 to eventually transfer some of our attack submarines to Australia and then build attack submarines for them. And that'll be more work at Quonset Point, by the way. Then on Pillar 2, it's a whole range of collaborations in terms of technology, in terms of course training. We're also reaching out to the government of Japan, to South Korea, and the Philippines. There's been an extreme change in attitude in the Philippines. We are now welcome there. We are training there. We are training Philippine forces there. And this presents a very complicated situation to the Chinese. They understand now it just won't be the U.S. It'll be the U.S., the Philippines, the Australians, the British, etc. And we hope that is in its formative stages, but it will coalesce into a formidable force that will, in fact, deter the Chinese. The other factor, too, and they're looking very closely at the Ukraine, is that the economic sanctions we've placed on Russia uh, could be extended to China. And one of their great issues is, how do you keep a billion plus people working every day? And so their economic connections is something too that I think they're beginning to worry about. And also, President Biden has just stepped up recently and imposed further tariffs on Chinese goods so that their availability in the U.S. market will be diminished. That'll give us a chance to build up our economy. And one of the things that, again, that President Biden did with great leadership was the CHIPS Act. Uh, we invented the microchip and the technology, but until even today, 80% of microchips are produced in South Korea, Taiwan, and China. Very, very unstable places or potentially unstable. Now we're moving production back to the United States. So we're going to have an economy that is able to produce sufficient microchips for all the needs we have. And the microchip is kind of it's in everything. It's the key to modern technology. So we'll no longer be dependent on China and others. We'll be virtually independent. And that's another example of bringing to bear both economic forces, industrial forces, and military forces to prevent a conflict in Asia.
With that, Senator, I think we have come to the end of our time together. Anything else that you would like to share with us?
Well, I just want to thank the Providence Chamber, commend you, obviously, Laurie, for your great work. And I understand your assistant, your your shadow is departing us, and I want to commend that young lady for her service to the state of Rhode Island and to Providence Chamber. But keep up the good work.
Of course, you're referring to my colleague Janet Raymond, and we
Of course,
all wish her well.
I'm referring to Janet Raymond. Everybody knows Janet Raymond. They don't know me. They know Janet Raymond. So, of course.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Have a safe trip to Normandy.
Thank you.
I think Janet will